Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, amazing people all around the world of crypto and blockchain. And today we are in for a treat. I have another amazing guest. He's accomplished quite a few things. So I'm very excited to present to you a co-maintainer of Morpheus. His name is David Johnston. David, welcome to the show today.
Hi, good to be here. I appreciate you having me. Looking forward to nerding out.
Awesome, awesome. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Like I said, there's a lot of things we could talk about, and but let's talk about the first thing. It's a question I ask everybody. The same question that I get amazing answers is, what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
I think so. I've effectively always been at the edge of technology since back in the early internet days, to date myself when online publishing was cutting edge, if you remember the 90s and early 2000s. But yeah, no, I've always sort of like, where can I contribute most to building freedom tech that will increase prosperity for individual humans, right? And that was the early days of the internet. I discovered Bitcoin in 2012 and sort of went all in there. Spoke at a lot of the first Bitcoin conferences, put together the first angel group in the Bitcoin space. And then Vitalik sent me the white paper for Ethereum. And I was like, wow, now we get smart contracts and decentralized finance and all these things. Because I'd been writing similar papers specifically around decentralized applications. So I guess most people know me for creating the framework for dApps in 2013. And it was basically, let's use the best practices that made Bitcoin so amazing. Open source, peer-to-peer, a blockchain ledger, and has its own token to create additional projects around different network effects. So anyway, that idea kind of caught on and got used by Ethereum and others. And so yeah, I spent a lot of the last 10 years sort of just trying to push up the stack. Like, how do we go from money to smart contracts to now I'm focused on decentralized AI? But it's really an extension of the same things I've been building the last 13 years, right? We're using Web3 wallets so you can own your AI, right? That's the payoff for me is I've been saying, not your keys, not your AI, right? I don't want to rent my intelligence from some big tech company. I want to own it, right? On an individual level, and Web3 lets me do that. So anyway, that's sort of been the journey in the last 12 years.
Wow, awesome. So I want to find out first what Morpheus is all about. Um, Yeah, then I have a question that I wasn't planning on asking you. But I'm sure I feel comfortable that I can. So let's talk about what Morpheus is all about first. I mean, what's your vision and your mission and your role there as a co-maintainer?
So Bitcoin, really I think organically emerged and a part of it was so powerful because Satoshi, disappeared, right? And walked away. And so when I saw the Morpheus white paper, the Anons dropped it, I want to say September 2nd, 2023, calling themselves Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo. And, I was really inspired by the paper, right? It's like fair launch. We need to give everybody access to intelligence. How do you do that? Somebody's got to host these large language models, but we want them ultimately to connect to the user's key, right? So it's their prompts and their data and their information. And I thought that was like a really inspiring vision. And so I started telling people about the Morpheus paper. I started talking about it. I ran into Eric Voorhees at a conference we were both at a few weeks later. And he's like, yeah, decentralized intelligence is going to be literally as important as decentralizing money. And if you know Eric Voorhees, that is a really strong statement, right? The original Bitcoin OG that had built many of the early projects and has sort of evangelized so much the need for honest money. To see him come to the same conclusion, like, yeah, this is the next big fight. How do we decentralize intelligence? Was really inspiring. So a lot of people started collating, or aggregating around this concept, and we started hosting these decentralized AI summits. So we did one in Austin and San Francisco and in the East Coast and Singapore, East Denver, all over the place, and bringing together everybody that wanted to see this vision become a reality. And so the last couple of years, it's turned into this whole movement because the timing was perfect. All these AI tools were getting better and better. Like the whole idea of an agentic web right? Like the web used to be websites and then it used to be apps, and now it's all getting rebuilt as agents, right? And that's, if you think that's the future, if you think 99% of commerce is going to be AI and agents acting on my behalf, how important it is that that's built on open source and decentralized and open to anybody and uncensored and permissionless. Like these are the values I really want to see instantiated. So with Morpheus, it's become this powerhouse of sort of correlating and coordinating the different projects that are all involved, right? So you probably know some groups like Akash or Venice or SETI or Hyperbolic. They're all providing inference, right? Access to the models. And what Morpheus is doing is really that aggregation layer. It's routing between the user that wants to use the model and all of these different GPU networks. So Morpheus doesn't host any GPUs. It's this aggregation layer. It's a set of smart contracts that connects the user to the provider, right? And not just for inference, but it's working to do that for agentic tools. It's working to do that sort of for everything somebody building a smart agent, an agent connected to smart contracts needs in order to succeed. So if you want a playbook, it's the Ethereum playbook, right? Ethereum didn't build a bunch of smart contracts. They built the consensus mechanism and Solidity and the EVM, right? All the infrastructure that a smart contract builder needed. Ethereum took on the hard work and years of effort to build all that infrastructure. Morpheus is doing that same thing, but in the context of smart agents.
Got it. Got it. So that makes sense to me. I think last podcast season, half of my 130 podcasts were about agents, AI agents. So I got a great education and understanding. So layer that you're building makes sense to me. But I want to back up a little bit and tell you about that question I wasn't planning to ask. You said that you are very interested in freedom tech and, in Ethereum, and you said Vitalik sent you the white paper. Well, I saw in the news yesterday, people are complaining about this, but PayPal minted 300 billion fresh PYUSD tokens on Ethereum out of thin air, right? How do you just print that money out of thin air? And how is it considered freedom tech?
So they printed $300 trillion yesterday.
Okay.
Trillion with a T, billion. Oh, that's yesterday. That would have been believable, but $300 trillion. Yeah. Stable coins are not directly connected to reality, right? They're dependent upon an oracle. And you're hoping that Tether or Circle or Coinbase or whoever the issuer of the stablecoin is honest and telling you how many dollars they have sitting in an account, and they're issuing a receipt effectively for each one. Right? That's how stablecoins work. And here, PayPal fat fingered the intern at PayPal fat fingered 300 trillion and deleted it 20 minutes later. But it shows you the attack surface, right? If somebody were to hack their keys, which probably is unlikely of PayPal, you'd hope, but plausible, they could issue a bunch of stablecoin and then try to sell and quickly get rid of those stablecoin in order to get some other asset and run away if it was an attacker or hacker, right? And so this is the problem that Satoshi solved. How do I know the provenance of every unit in the system? And the thing you can't fake is electrical power. Like somebody competed, you know, to provide that power to the network and got rewarded with some Bitcoin. In the Ethereum context, there's a million validators and $100 billion of economic security, competing to earn those ETH, right? And so you can't just magically print more ETH, right? So whether it's proof of work or proof of stake, these are different mechanisms for proving the provenance of all the units in circulation. And yeah, if you don't have that, you're depending on that oracle, and that's the risk profile of stablecoins. Though we're going to get into more real world assets, and I don't think there's any avoiding that. And as soon as you enter the real world, you have to have an oracle, right? Because it's not entirely on chain. So it's a brave new world, but yeah, it's worth understanding the risk profiles. But what's useful is even if it's depending on an oracle, at least it's automated. At least it's transparent. At least we could see on chain immediately the mistake that they had made. these mistakes happen in traditional finance. It's just we never see it because it's inside an internal database and you hope that they catch it, but sometimes they don't, right? And so the funny thing here is there was another example of this recently, like somebody was, trading on the news of the tariffs, so like, when the market went down and then went up, and it's clearly like they had some information because they did really well on their shorts and then quickly exited them all. And people are like, oh, darn you, hyperliquid, and you're, enabling of this stuff. Like, no, this was always happening. We've just never been able to see it happen. Like, welcome to transparent ledgers, right? So, it's a brave new world, but the upside is not only the transparency, but to bring it back to agents is the programmability. Now my agent can pay on my behalf. Now I can do a transaction using, like, say, X402, or one of these other good protocols that has emerged. Coinbase has done a lot of work to basically give agents wallets in a granular fashion where they never get the private key, but they're able to do a transaction or interact with the smart contract. So the people that know what they're doing, I think, are doing a good job. But it is kind of funny to watch some of these TradFi folks stumble into the space and learn some rough lessons, maybe.
It reminds me of that song "Stumbling In." You know, um, yeah. When I came from a TradFi background working at AIG, and whenever our database went down, it was the biggest deal in the company. But no, we didn't know anybody externally about it. We just fixed it and got it back up. You
Yeah.
know, now you can see it go down. Um, you said state of Ethereum. So I wanted to find out from you, like, network state, like what that is,
Hmm.
definition of network state, and how does blockchain achieve that state, and then what's going to be AI's role in helping blockchain to achieve that state.
So I really love the network state concept. If people haven't read the book, Balaji has a great write-up, basically about the concept of societies moving from city states to nation states, inevitably to network states, right? And these being geographically diverse, like somebody can be part of Bitcoin or Ethereum or Base or Zcash anywhere that they live in the world, right? And so it's also this idea of opt in, opt out. Like, I can become a Bitcoiner. I don't need anybody's permission, right? I can join the Bitcoin nation, if you will, and, or I can become an Ethereum and use smart contracts, and I don't need anybody's permission, right? And so this is sort of a new set of values, and people are starting to adopt these as like their identities. Like, they feel very strongly this almost tribal identity of like they're part of that. And it was cool in Singapore at the Network State Conference to see Zcash and these other groups get on stage and say, we're becoming network states, right? So now they're explicitly embracing the goal of not just having a ledger of assets, right? Not just letting people do commerce, but starting to add these social layers, these identity layers, these abilities for even for it to pop into the real world, right? To go back to the real world assets. So you see Prospera and these other charter cities starting to pop up that embrace this sort of open source opt-in, opt-out ethos. And so I hope to see that really continue because it's inevitable, I think. We're at $4 trillion in the on-chain economy. But there's $100 trillion to go, right? And quadrillions if you include, derivatives and other things like that, right? So we've got a long way to go. And as we transfer all these assets on chain, we still have to deal with the real world, right? So what's a framework where I can, know my contracts are going to execute, and I know, I can travel and live and be free in the physical world and not just in the digital one. So to me, that's really inspiring. And I think the agentic web has a big part to play. I think most commerce is going to be done by your agent. You're just going to tell it what you want to do. It understands the intent and then connects with a specific agent that does that. Think of the iPhone in the App Store, right? Your phone didn't come pre-installed with a million apps, right? As you went through life and, oh, I need the United app, or I need the American app, I need whatever, right? I downloaded that and it gave me some specific ability, right? And so the operating system is great, but it's not the same as the application layer, right? So that's how you should think of the models, right? The large language models have a good understanding of broad knowledge, but they're not necessarily connected to one API in a private database that's able to give you access to a ticket to United, right? You need a specific agent. So the agents are really this application layer, right? Where you can very fine tune, get access to a specific thing. So you're going to end up using a bunch of different models, maybe one or two of the most powerful, but importantly, you're going to have hundreds of agents, maybe thousands of agents. I've already set up like 100 that basically do daily tasks for me. Everything from reading emails to writing reports to creating food planning for meals and stuff like that, and shopping lists and anything you can imagine. It's like I don't need to have that mental burden anymore. I can hand that off to an agent if I can describe what I want to be accomplished. And so for me, that's the big payoff is we're headed into this world where you've got your agent working on your behalf 24/7, 365. When I'm sleeping, it can still be answering emails, right? When I'm on vacation, right, it can still be catching up with the news and giving me summaries and stuff like that, right? So, I think that's to me really exciting, but it presumes that I have uncensored intelligence and it's permissionless. And to bring it back to Morpheus, the model is very unique, right? I don't want to put a credit card on file, and if it expires, I lose access, right? That's not ownership, that's renting, right? And so instead in Morpheus, I can stake the more token, and I have persistent access to the inference on the network. So as long as that token is staked for 10 years, 100 years, whatever, my agent's going to keep running. Now I've got persistence. It's like you publish a smart contract on Ethereum, you can just presume it's going to keep running, right? And it's going to be operational a year from now, 10 years from now, and that lets you then compound the value, right? You can treat it as a building block and you can build the next thing on top. And so Morpheus is effectively doing that for these smart agents. So once you build something and release it into the wild and put it on Morpheus, you know, it's acting as this almost like virtual machine. Just like we thought of Ethereum in the early days as a world computer, it's that same concept, but for agents.
Got it. That makes sense. I like the analogy to having the iPhone with the apps for having the agent working for me doing things that I shouldn't be thinking or just telling me what to do. I understand that. I get that. I would think that creates a world that's more customized for each individual person. I'm wondering how we can build a future where technology is more accessible and transparent for everybody. Like I don't want people to see my daily tasks, right? So how are you differentiating how building that world that's more transparent with also building the world that's more customized?
Well, the public infrastructure should be transparent, but the private information should be private, right? And so you look at a lot of the projects on Morpheus, they're doing encryption of the prompts from when it leaves your computer to when it goes into the GPU and back. There's a lot of good work going on with trusted execution elements. If you've heard of TEEs, there's also a lot of work with zero knowledge proofs. And a lot of that is still imperfect, but it's 100x better than literally handing your data to Google or OpenAI, who explicitly tell you they are mining and advertising and using all of your data for their products in perpetuity. And oh, by the way, we have to keep a copy in case in 10 years the government wants to know what you thought back in that time, right? So, compared to the Orwellian nightmare that is centralized AI, you know, the decentralized solutions are a lot more privacy preserving, right? These are effectively your thoughts, right? This is really personal. This is really intimate. Like people are asking health questions, relational questions, like legal questions, like things that they kept in their mind. They're now putting in the AI and they presume that they have privacy they don't have in these centralized systems, right? And so, I think that's an important aspect for people to understand. Unfortunately, privacy hasn't driven a lot of behavior for some people who sort of realize the importance that that's like their thing, but maybe that's 50 million people in the world. A lot of people, they're living life, they're busy, they just want it to be free and cheap and easy to use. And so, while I believe privacy is an important human right, I think the selling point is you can use it without restriction. There are countries like China that straight up ban ChatGPT. I'm sorry if you're Chinese, the government has decided no ChatGPT for you, right? And so the open source model has become their only alternative. And so it's not by mistake that it's open source models, which are largely coming out of China, like DeepSeek and others, because that's what they can do, right? And that's what can't be stopped and can't be censored and all the rest. And so, that trend is continuing to accelerate. The open source models have caught up and a lot of times surpassed the quality of the proprietary models, which thank God, really, there's not some giant gap between the proprietary folks and the open source folks. And, I try to break down these myths because the big companies would have you think that they have all the power and all the compute and all the intelligence within their four walls. They don't. They don't. That's what we saw with Linux. That's what we saw with Android. The open source version won. That's what we saw with the internet, right? You remember AOL was this little closed garden. And despite all their money, they lost to the open free internet, right? Because permissionless and low friction systems just tend to win over time. So I think the same thing's going to happen here. Sure, some big enterprise may want to use XYZ proprietary tool. But most people are going to look for the free open source permissionless alternative because again, it's that Linux Android type of thing. It's going to be the lowest cost. And most people don't have a GPU to run it themselves. So you have to have some solution like Morpheus where somebody else can run the inference, but the guy with the $150 Android phone, he can benefit. That's the key, is we have to get to those light clients that the average person can use without an economic or permission barrier.
Got it. Makes sense. You like to break down myths. So I have a myth for you because you said, do I have ever heard of TEEs? I had one podcast where somebody explained to me the TEEs. And here's the, I found out this myth or fact. TEEs eliminate the need for zero knowledge.
Um, it's an alternative. Um, the trusted execution element have just started getting put into the GPUs. So this has been common for a while in the CPUs, but I think it was H100s where they were the first generation that got TEs directly into the GPUs. But there's a lot of nuance. It's very difficult to prove the thing that goes into the TE and oh, by the way, it's going to go back and forth from the CPU and the GPU and the memory. And do I have full coverage? And ultimately, I am trusting NVIDIA or whoever put the TE chip into the machine that it matches their registry, and it really is secure. So I wouldn't say it's perfect. It's a huge improvement, right? It's a great direction. I'm glad that the hardware is headed that way. But zero knowledge proofs are hardware agnostic. And so it's an alternative, right? There's a lot of use cases in which you can't use a TE that a zero knowledge proof might make sense. The thing that everybody's waiting for is fully homomorphic encryption, FHE. And that's the holy grail that people have been looking towards in cryptography for a long time, but it's been too computationally expensive. Like it took 1,000 times more, 1,000,000 times more computation to do FHE, where you can basically just hand somebody encrypted data, they can run the computation and hand it back to you encrypted. Like that's amazing. That's black magic. That's, amazing cryptography. But the hardware is almost there. They're building accelerator chips now that claim that FHE will be at the same level of plain text as far as like computationally expensive. And so hopefully we see that fairly soon. And I expect a lot of things might shift that way. There are good projects like Phoenix and others that are doing it for like very small use cases, like running smart contracts that are only a few hundred bytes. Like, okay, I can put it in an EVM context. And so it's starting to creep into different parts of the infrastructure, but I would love to see it for agents and models, but the hardware is not quite there yet. But TE is a good alternative in the meantime. Encryption, end-to-end, zero knowledge proofs. I'm not too hung up on like one technology to rule them all. It really depends on your use case.
Well, let's talk about that. One technology to rule them all. You have a lot of people out there, we call them Bitcoin maximalists, who claim there is no second best. But you said earlier, oracles. So when I think of DeFi, I think Aave and Chainlink and other oracles. You know, you know, what do you think the DeFi depends upon? Why is it important to offer like options like yield on those instruments where you don't have as much yield? I guess it's coming on Bitcoin, and what's possible? Looking at AI inferencing in combination with blockchain like Bitcoin and and AI together.
So personally, I'm a freedom maximalist. Whatever increases human freedom. I love Bitcoin. I went all in 2012. Like, I'm a Bitcoiner, but I also need smart contracts. And I also need a decentralized AI. And these are different network effects, right? The one that wins digital gold isn't necessarily going to win as a marketplace for inference. Like, it's not built for that. It's not trying to be. It doesn't want to be that, right? The Bitcoin core developers have been very clear. They want digital gold and store of wealth, and they want, it to be very simple and low attack surface, and then they're not going to do certain things. And that's okay, right? That's a choice around what network effect they want to build, right? And we see this all over technology. Google search, right? But people don't think of Google for social, right? Do you remember their failed Google Plus like social network thing? Like, they were trying to basically kill Facebook when it was a tiny company back in the day, but nobody thought of Google for social. And so the network effect of social and my social graph continued to grow on Facebook and other systems, right? During that whole time, despite Google having way more money and way more power and all these, it didn't matter, right? And so it's okay that network effects specialize. And this is where you can get to like neutral infrastructure like Morpheus is use the model that's best for you. Use the agent that's best for you. Use the chain that's best for you. If it makes sense to do it on Ethereum or Base or something else, the infrastructure ought to leave that choice to the individual as opposed to dictating some consensus lowest common denominator. Like, just let people decide, right? I'm a big believer in free markets. They work pretty well because people are expressing preferences and giving information to the system. And so when it comes to Morpheus, one of the things I really love to your question on yield is it's taken this approach now with the launch of the V2 of the capital contracts with how people can contribute capital to Morpheus. They started with staked Ethereum, and now that's been expanded to wrapped Bitcoin, wrapped ETH, USDT, USDC. So you can effectively choose what exposure you want to hold, and you want to stake it towards Morpheus in Aave, and then direct that yield into the protocol. You've got the same number of tokens you started with, but you're contributing that yield in order to get the more token, right? And this is really cool because if I'm a Bitcoiner, I just want to hold Bitcoin. I don't want to convert to something else. That's fine, right? Contribute that yield. The same for the ETH Maxi, the same for somebody sitting in stable coins. Maybe they're running a VC or something like that. Whatever use case they have, they can keep the long exposure they want, but they can still start to get access to this new agentic economy, right? They can get access to this freedom of intelligence by earning those more tokens. So for me, that's really exciting. We've seen $3 billion of capital flow through those smart contracts, which is insane. And that's largely because people are like, well, I'm going to hold these tokens anyway. I might as well stake them towards a cool open source project that I want to exist, right? And so it's like almost like a reinvention of ICOs minus the treasuries, minus the central parties, all in smart contracts, right? There's no entity involved, there's no sale. It's this never-ending competition, right? And so people have been doing this now for more than a year, and it's bootstrapped the whole network into existence. So on the capital side, for me, that's really exciting, because these networks aren't just technology, they're capital, they're economics, and so being an economics nerd and a tech nerd, like you really need both sides. You need to reward capital people, but also people providing compute, but also developers. And that's usually the forgotten group is 48% of the emissions in Morpheus go to coders of the protocol and builders of agents on top. Like, that's amazing. It's rewarded out millions of dollars of incentives to developers. And that's why there's over 100 projects like Venice and others built on Morpheus that are using the technology. It's like you get whatever you reward. And so capital, compute, but also code has to be one of those things.
Got it. You said something interesting. You said way more money, way more power, but then you also said the future of information is decentralized. And I look at BlackRock, who came out this week, and Larry Fink, we're building our own blockchain RWA network, and I'm looking at some of the platforms that are inside of BlackRock, and they're antiquated systems, like very antiquated stuff I used to use like 20, 30 years ago. How do you, even though they have way more money, way more power, isn't this true? Like, how is it that they're going to fall behind the information from the decentralized coders and builders? You know, where do you see the future here? And how do you see that playing out?
So, like we talked about, having the capital and the size isn't everything. You need access to the new technology, and you need to have been built this sticky network effect. You know, um, People are using Ethereum, right? They're not going to rewrite their smart contracts in 10 years of Solidity code because XYZ company came out and said, we're doing our own blockchain. Like, if it's not EVM, it's basically dead on arrival, right? Everybody, even outside the Ethereum ecosystem, one by one, have adopted the Ethereum virtual machine, right? The EVM is the lingua franca of all smart contracts. And if they're not there yet, they're getting there quick because they've realized, you know, the barrier is, access to the tools to actually build. Like you can have a great network, but if I don't have the wallet or the multi-sig or the 10 other tools I need to actually operate it, like it's all in theory, right? And so that's sort of like this invisible moat that each project has is it's aggregated the top expertise in their area. Like and Bitcoin has done this too, right? The number of people that understand it and the number of people have studied it, the large amount of power that's been aggregated by the miners, like that's a huge moat. Like nobody's creating another Bitcoin. It would take an unimaginable amount of effort and coordination. And so there's sort of, they've got that great entrenched moat. And the same for Ethereum, and for Morpheus, I haven't seen a lot of other players really doing the heavy lift of building all this interoperability. Like everybody's focused on their product, like their agent or their model or their whatever, but they're not tying together, right? All of the different infrastructure across the ecosystem. So you need somebody to sort of patiently do the effort to build that in an incredibly neutral way, where it's not owned by one protocol or one company, but it's accessible for all, right? And that's sort of the challenge, but also the opportunity.
Got it. So the key is interoperability, really.
Yep,
Yeah, makes
100%.
sense.
I mean, think about the history. I heard Craig Sellers in the Mastercoin Foundation in 2013, and he went on to create Tether on Mastercoin. People forget that came out of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it wasn't until 2019 that they added interoperability with Ethereum. And that's really when it took off from the first $1 billion of USDT to $50 billion, like overnight in the 2021 bull run. And credit to them for sort of having that neutral approach where they're all Bitcoiners, but they realized they needed the technology and distribution and rails of Ethereum. And they've since expanded to a bunch of other chains. And so I think there's something to be said for multi-chain architectures and really being open.
Awesome. That makes sense. That's really good. Um, so I have a couple of more questions for you. One is, you are the author of the original DApps white paper in 2013. I want to find out how have we evolved since you wrote that white paper, and what do you think the DApps will look like in another decade?
So, it's amazing to see how far it's come. To think there's $1 trillion of dApps today is nice validation that, a lot of people told me, they would all fail and there could only be one coin. And, we've come a long way from that view. And so um, I think agents is this new version of dApps, right? It's an application on a blockchain that can act on my behalf, right? And it's just in a new form. It's in a new wrapper, right? This agentic form that can automatically interact. using large language models. So yeah, I think in the next decade, we may well go from 4 trillion to 400 trillion. I really do think, you know, there's no there's no avoiding that this new ledger is programmable and instant and auditable and transparent and all these other things. Tell me the application that'll still be running on pens and papers and closed databases in 20 years. Like there might be somebody in a, an Amish farm somewhere that's, still running, that old system, but like they're not going to be economically relevant, right? Most of the world's capital is moving as fast as it can to these new systems, which is really exciting because it's benefiting a lot of people. Most of the users in the world, they're all in the developing world. They're all in Indonesia, Nigeria, and India, and Brazil. There's not a country in the top 10 from Europe. You got lots of ways to pay for stuff and invest. It's the 4 or 5 billion guys that have a smartphone and have never had an option or an opportunity to participate in the global economy, and they finally do. That's where it matters.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Although the Amish make really good houses, so infrastructure
100%. 100%. My parents have a bunch of their furniture.
Excellent, excellent.
Love the Amish.
Awesome. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. I enjoyed speaking with you. This has been a fun conversation. I have one and informative and educational, so thank you. I have one last question. It's easy. How can people find out more information about you, about Morpheus? How can they do that?
So the easy way is just go to more.org, mor.org, and check it out. You can see the GitHub, you can use it, you can play with the different applications, you can contribute capital if you're holding stable coins or these other assets. Or you can just use it, right? If you're a developer, grab the API, right? You can, with one button, create a key and stick in an open source model for whatever you're building. And that's all free to test out in the beta right now. So that's all on openbeta.more.org. So whether you're a developer or somebody with some capital or just want to learn about it, I'd really lean in. I think this is the next important thing to understand.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Great talking with you. Take care.